first of all, let me say thanks for coming today. There's a lot of people here, and my role today is to introduce some folks that are going to be running some legislation and talking about things that we can do in New Mexico to make our citizens safer. So my role is really to MC today, and I want to make some introductions from some folks, and they're going to tell you about what they're doing, and I'm here to support them in their efforts because we frankly need the help. We've got a lot of law enforcement here today. Chief Eden, I see, is here. Assistant Chief Huntsman is here. Let's do a quick run around and see. We got APD here. What other agencies do we have today? We got
Valencia County Sheriff's Office.
Valencia County Sheriff.
Bernalillo County
Sheriff. Bosque Farms is here. Anybody else here?
Chief Geyer,
Chief Geyer from Rio Rancho.
Bernalillo PD.
State Police Chief Casetas, thank you, sir, for coming today. Bernalillo PD. So we've got a lot of law enforcement here today. And let me just set this up. We're going to have 4 speakers today. Myself, Mayor Hull from Rio Rancho is going to speak. And then we're going to have Nate Gentry, the Majority Leader in the House, speak. And then we're going to have Representative Paul Pacheco, who is a former police officer himself, talk about 3 pieces of legislation that they have. I hope that this is the first of a number of press conferences that we can have to introduce the citizens of New Mexico to some ideas that are out there to make our community safer. We have a real contradiction in Albuquerque right now. We just finished 5 years of the lowest FBI crime rates we've had in 25 years. Yet at the same time, this summer we had 6 young people die in our community. At the same time, we had Officer Benner shot and killed in Rio Rancho, and Lily Garcia shot and killed in a road rage incident. And then, of course, we just had the funeral for Officer Webster in Albuquerque. And when you look around the United States, there's a trend going on, and violent crime is on the upswing. The FBI director just gave a speech, and he talked about the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And violent crime is on the rise in the United States, and I think you're going to see 2015 as a year where violent crime has been on the rise in New Mexico and in Albuquerque. And we have to do better. We have to find ways to make New Mexico a better place to be a mom and a dad and a business owner and a kid, and a worse place to be a criminal, especially a repeat offender. And I'm just very thankful that we have leaders in the New Mexico Senate, in the New Mexico House, Democrats, Republicans, people that go out every day and try to make us safer, but we need more done. And so I'm going to invite Mayor Hull to say a few words, and then we're going to have Majority Leader Gentry and Representative Pacheco tell you about some of their ideas, and then we'll be happy to answer some questions as well. Mayor Hull, would you give us a few comments? Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. First off, all I can say is this comes far too soon on the heels of Officer Benner's death, that we're saying goodbye to yet another law enforcement officer through tragic and senseless violence. The senseless death of Rio Rancho police officer Greg Benner ignited a conversation about the criminal justice reform in New Mexico. With the heartbreaking death of Lily Garcia and the killing of APD officer Daniel Webster, this conversation has now become a movement. Andrew Romero had 2 warrants issued before killing Officer Benner, one for violating probation and the second for alleging he committed 8 armed robberies from March 22nd to April 8th. Tony Torres had a long criminal history before he took Lily Garcia's life. He has faced charges in 9 different misdemeanors or felony cases, and 7 of those were dismissed. Davon Lyman, a storied criminal history as well before shooting and killing Officer Webster. He'd been charged with voluntary manslaughter, aggravated battery, fraud, and forgery. These violent criminals should not have been out on the streets, much less have been in possession of a firearm. Representative Pacheco is introducing legislation that will revamp New Mexico's 3 strikes and you're outlaw. So many New Mexicans have been saying something needs to be done, something needs to change. This is the time for change, and this is the legislation that's going to be doing that. We owe it to those that have been injured and those that have died at the hands of repeat violent offenders to not only have the conversation about criminal justice reform, but to also take action. So I'm proud to stand here today with Mayor Berry and the representatives and law enforcement and start that conversation and get something moving and stop saying that something just needs to be done, but actually take steps to get this reform in place and make our communities a much safer place. And thank you, Mayor, for having this press conference.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank
Appreciate
you for everybody in the room. Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor's right. And when I talked to Lily Garcia's parents, I made them a promise that we'd push and we'd push hard for reform. When I talk to our police officers, I tell them we're going to push hard for reform. When I talk to our citizens, I tell them we're going to push hard for reform. I think Mayor said it best. We need to have a movement in New Mexico. We need the citizens to support our legislators, to support law enforcement, to support making sure that Albuquerque and New Mexico are better places to be a family and worse places to be a criminal. So I'm going to bring up Majority Leader Gentry, who's behind me here, from the House of Representatives. He's going to tell you about 3 pieces of legislation today. He's going to talk about 2, and Representative Pacheco is going to talk about his bill. Representative.
First, thank you, Mayor Barry. We've seen over the course of the summer and the fall a tragic pattern that keeps repeating itself. And it's time for the legislature to act and put an end to that pattern. And as great as the law enforcement is, as we have in the state, and I want to thank them for their brave sacrifice and service to the state of New Mexico, they need help. And what we're doing under the current framework of laws we have in place is putting our law enforcement in peril, because they are forced to arrest the same bad people with long criminal histories again and again and again. And what happens is a lot of times these people will do anything, as we've seen this summer and fall, not to get caught. And it's just a tragic pattern that needs to be stopped, and that's going to take help from Santa Fe. Right now, we see that criminals who have been adjudicated, charged with numerous violent crimes out on the streets, and they shouldn't be. And it's time for that to stop. Now, we've been working with the mayor and Chief Eden and other law enforcement throughout the state to draft legislation and put in place legislation that would help curb this pattern. The first thing that I want to talk about is adding police officers to the hate crime statute, which is long overdue. It's become clear over the course of this fall and this summer that our protectors need protection. We buried just our 3rd officer this year, just on Tuesday. And so we need to give them the help they need. And so the law would be changed under this proposal. So if you hurt a police officer, because they're a police officer, you're going to spend more time in jail. The second proposal I wanted to talk about is a constitutional amendment that would, and this is something we're working across the aisle on, that would allow judges to deny bail and bond and keep dangerous, violent criminals in jail until trial. What we're seeing over and over again is that these violent criminals are meeting some conditions of release. They're out on the streets and committing more violent crimes. Finally is enhancing the 3 strikes law. And this is a bill that Representative Pacheco has been working on and will carry. But under the current 3 strikes law, we have not had 1 conviction. So we need to enhance that law to include crimes like first-degree abuse against a child. So I'd like to introduce Representative Pacheco so he could talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Representative. Good afternoon. This piece of legislation is very personal to me. I had some remarks that I was going to talk about, but I think I'm just going to talk to you about come from the heart. We have a major problem in this state with repeat offenders. As a police officer for 27 years, I dealt with it myself on the street, and I know that my law enforcement family deals with it every day, and it seems to be getting worse. And we seem to be just recycling the same violent offenders. When Officer Benner was killed in Rio Rancho earlier in the year, it started a dialogue and kind of reignited a dialogue that a lot of us have been having for a lot of years, because we've been talking about this. This hasn't been just something brand new, but it's been brought up in previous sessions about repeat offenders and how we need to make sure that we put those violent offenders, those predators, away. So we had Officer Benner shot, and I knew him personally, and then we had Lou Golson shot, and I've known Lou for the better part of almost 30 years. And then little Lily Garcia was shot, and I know her mother. And it struck me deeply and affected me deeply. And then I'm going to get emotional because Dan's death is still very raw to me. I worked with Dan. Dan was a great cop. He was a great guy. He was a good man. So when this dialogue started, we started looking at the weakness in our three strikes law. And it's been around, I think, since 1994. And not only have we haven't had anybody charged, much less convicted. So we went through and looked, and the bill was crafted so narrowly that it didn't cover a vast myriad of violent offenses. So I looked back and had some help, not only from other legislators, but law enforcement, and we crafted a bill that directly targets violent offenders. This doesn't have anything to do with nonviolent folks at all. So I did not want to create another set of unintended circumstances or consequences. So this bill will be strictly, the floor on it will be third-degree felonies, violent felonies against persons. And there's a list of crimes that are inclusive. And we had so many holes in this statute that we have people committing rapes that those charges aren't even included in the three strikes. They couldn't even use those charges. So this broadens it. There's a list that I have that I'm more than happy to share. I am committed to getting bipartisan support for this bill. I'm going to work hard to get support from the Senate and my fellow representatives across the aisle. And I know that there's several representatives here, and I know my law enforcement family supports me in this, and I know that the public wants this. They are tired of turning on the TV and seeing the same violent offenders committing violent crimes against this community. And every time one of these individuals commits these violent crimes, it's a crime against the very heart of this community and the state of New Mexico. And I appreciate the mayor. I appreciate my law enforcement family, Mayor Hull. I talked to Mrs. Garcia this morning. She was unable to attend. I made the same commitment to her that the mayor did, that I would work very hard to make sure that this law gets through. This is one piece of a bigger puzzle, folks. This is one piece. We need to start working on some of the other parts of it too. So this is one piece, and we're gonna do our best to get it through. Thank you.
Representative, thank you. I want to thank Representative Pacheco also. He co-sponsored, along with Mary Kay Papin, the assisted outpatient treatment bill. And when we think about Officer Smith and King, and when they were killed, that is legislation that New Mexico doesn't have, that almost every other state does have. And we need that as well. So we're going to have a number of these opportunities to talk to the public. Today's really about these three things. But let me just echo this, and then we'll open it up for questions. Every time the men and women of APD or state police or the sheriff's department in any one of our communities has to go out and rearrest somebody that they arrested hours, days, or months before, that's one more chance for an officer-involved shooting. It's one more chance for an officer to be shot and killed. It's one more chance for an unintended consequence and someone innocent being injured. And we can do better, and we need to do better. And I want to thank everybody here today. We're going to ask our community to rally around some of these ideas, have conversations with their legislators on a bipartisan basis, as we said earlier. And if we do these things that we think are common sense things to do, we know we can make it a lot better. And we can make it a lot better for all of us, in particular the men and women of our public safety departments who are out there risking their lives every day for us. And I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for risking your lives. We've got some other state representatives here. Let's introduce ourselves, and we can, I know these folks already, but go ahead.
Hi, I'm David Atkins, State Representative for District 29, Northwest Albuquerque.
Sarah Maestas Barnes, State Representative for District 15, North Valley, Far Northeast Heights.
Yeah, I don't think we have any other representatives here today. So, Bob, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm Bob Martinez. I'm the State President of the Fraternal Order of Police, and one of the things that we're pushing for, we're the largest law enforcement organization in the country. And very definitely, as Representative Pacheco said, we have to have assaults on police officers meet part of hate crimes legislation. That is clearly inappropriate for people to take on these officers. Enough is enough. These men and women are out there providing a service. They're protecting and serving their communities. And we certainly support Representative Pacheco.
Let's open it up for some questions if you have them. And everybody's offered to answer any specific questions that you might have about their legislation or whatever you might have.
Representative Gentry, you mentioned a bill that would deny bail or change that.
Nate, you want to come on?
Talk to Senator Worth. He's got a similar bill, I think.
Yeah, Peter. Peter's working on this,
Is
yeah.
that gonna be?
Same thing. We're working with Peter. You know, it's a very important bill, as you're well aware. You know, people are able to bond out. You know, bail is set, and adding to the problem is, you know, the recent Brown decision. So a judge must grant reasonable bail. So, you know, we're seeing these violent criminals who are arrested, bail is set, you know, grandma's coming up with money by mortgaging the house or whatever the means is, and they're getting out and reoffending.
And I worked with Senator Worth also when I was a representative, and he was a representative. I know he's working on that. He's a good person to work on, and this is part of that bipartisanship I'm talking about. Senator Worth is a Democrat, Pacheco is a Republican, Nate's a Republican. So this needs to be a bipartisan effort, and I'm just very happy as a mayor that we're seeing that in this effort.
Nate, so you would call for a constitutional amendment to, what would it say, or have you actually drafted the language?
Yeah, there's one basic change, Dennis, and that is that if after a hearing, if the judge determines that the defendant is a risk to the community, that they may deny bail.
Do you know how many additional people this would put in jail?
We don't. You know, that generally gets fleshed out during the committee process. LFC will do a fiscal impact report, and so we'll have all that information during the session.
At least some of these ideas are not new ideas. What chance is there that they will actually be enacted this time or overcome opposition that's held them up in the past?
Well, we have the opportunity to do this, and you know, unfortunately, we've had some tragic events. And if there's anything good that can come out of tragic events, it's positive change. And so we're just hopeful that people can kind of put down their political swords, find a way to work together to make New Mexico, and of course my city, and I'm sure that Mayor Hull would echo this, his city, a safer place. You know, you've got to be optimistic. You saw our community come together like never before, and you saw Rio Rancho come together like never before. For Officer Benner, for Lily Garcia, for Officer Webster. I tell my community every day, time heals pains, but let's never forget. Let's use this as an opportunity, these tragedies as an opportunity to put ourselves in a better position. So you never know until you get there. But I know a lot of these folks in the legislature, they're good people. They give up their time from their families and their businesses to serve. And we're just hoping in a bipartisan way we can just make this happen.
You talked about one step, this being one step. Can you maybe
Paul,
outline what some of the other steps would be? Where you think change needs to come?
Well, some of the areas that I'm looking at is minimum mandatory sentencing and for violent offenders. I know that the judiciary likes to maintain a certain amount of discretion when it comes to issuing sentences, so we have to be sensitive about that. But the reality is that we have the same small group of violent offenders committing the same violent crimes, and they're committing the majority of violent crimes. And so I know that there's going to be talk about, well, prison populations, we need to be careful with that. And certainly there are those individuals, and we've talked about this too, there are those nonviolent offenders that may be programs or other sorts of maybe community corrections, other avenues to put them into, so that we make sure that we have room in our prisons for these violent offenders. Because when you start looking back in the histories of these individuals, you see a definite pattern. And so you begin to look at it and say, why is this individual out on the street? He's been arrested for X number of violent felonies. He should never have been there. And what happens is and this is what I'm not going to let this happen. This is not going away. I'm not going to just be quiet, and I'm not just going to let Officer Webster's memory, Officer Benner's, Lily Garcia, Lou Golson, I mean, one of my heroes. I mean, the guy's just amazing. I mean, we cannot forget about this, and we go on about our lives as we do. We need to make sure that these things don't reoccur. And again, it's part of a puzzle. So mandatory requirements for mandatory minimum sentencing would be another piece to this puzzle.
And AOT.
Absolutely. AOT was absolutely, Mayor.
You know, we talk about, and I want to reiterate this because as I was a state legislator, we talked about this, and as a mayor, and I talked to these ladies and gentlemen about this, we are talking about a small number of people that do lots and lots of harm. So I think it's really important that, I've been convinced by all these efforts that are going on, this is about a small number of people. I went as far as New York City recently and met with their police department. They have the same issue. Every city has the same issue. Small numbers of people do a lot of harm, and these are the people that these representatives are targeting. So this shouldn't be construed as filling our jails up. This should be construed of getting the worst of the worst off the street. And we've got our federal friends that are starting to help us. It's just a little sad that as a mayor we have to go to our federal friends because they have the enhancements and the penalties that we need when our state doesn't have them. So hopefully these leaders can change that.